Anyway, I'd like to welcome back. He is a neighbor of ours in Moravia, or he came from Moravia, graduated from Moravia High School. Ace Abbott. He is a retired pilot and has written a couple books, especially the one that I thought he was going to talk about with Dead Tired Pilots. So Ace, welcome to BBC 8 again. He was here last year, and his books are available around. So why did you start flying?
Well, I started flying because my dad, we lived on a little small farm up in the beautiful Finger Lakes area of upstate New York, about 3 miles from the Joe and Charlene Murray residence. And at any rate, my dad had a good bean crop one year, and he got about $800 a head, and wisely decided to invest it in an airplane rather than put indoor plumbing in the house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so now we had an airplane. We didn't have indoor plumbing, but we had an airplane. And then in the summer months when we harvest the hay, we'd go take the old Taylorcraft airplane for a ride, dodging woodchuck holes, down over the hayfield, climb up over the valley where the old farmhouse was, and we'd start every flight with a loop. Dad loved to have fun with the airplane, so we'd do a loop, and then do a spin, and then we would fly up to the Murray place and buzz the farmers up in West Niles. It was really a lot of fun. We'd catch a farmer out on his tractor baling hay and give him a low-level flyby to get his adrenaline pumping. And that's how I got started. But then in the late 40s, early 50s, I guess it was, we had a nor'easter that rendered the airplane into the trees. The airplane ended up tore into little pieces up in the treetops, and so that was the end of my flying until 1965, my senior year in college. I was walking down Main Street and stopped very briefly in front of the Air Force recruiter's office, and next thing I knew, he had me inside taking tests. And before I knew it, I was off in the Air Force flying the F-4 Phantom around the Far East. And that led to a long and interesting and venturesome aviation career, a odyssey that I often refer to as frequent oscillations between the aviation penthouse and the aviation outhouse, as it was quite common for the airline I worked for to go out of business. And so I had a very interesting career. In 36 years, I covered 44 countries, and also had 20 different employers during that period of time. So it was interesting, exciting. I got to fly. I got to fly a lot of interesting people, of course, celebrities, Palm Beach socialites to South Florida drug dealers. Not to exclude Jack Nicklaus and Helen Reddy and John Glenn and many other celebrities of that nature. And at any rate, when I retired, two of my very good friends insisted that I write a book about my radical aviation career, which led to the Rogue Aviator being published 3 years ago. And that was very popular, and that led me to the Oshkosh Air Show up in Wisconsin, which is the biggest air show in the world. And as a featured author, where I presented my book and sold and signed the book. And then, at any rate, 2 years ago, they asked me to do a speech about pilot fatigue, since I was reasonably knowledgeable about it, having quite a bit of experience in my career, sleeping in the cockpit, of course. But at any rate,
I was thinking that's
sure,
what you meant by that.
had to catch a cat nap once in a while. But
Yeah.
But at any rate, I decided I had a few months to put together a book before I went up to Oshkosh, and so I created and published the book Dead Tired. And Dead Tired, I think, is one of those. I think they call them a double entendre. It has two different meanings, if you will. Pilot fatigue is pretty straightforward, and aviation's insidious killer is part of the subtitle. Well, insidiousness is the key element in sleep deprivation and fatigue, in that insidious is defined as a slow, subtle, barely noticeable change that creates harmful effects. And that's what sleep deprivation, which leads to pilot fatigue, is all about. And unfortunately, most pilots and other people, truck drivers and car drivers, et cetera, ad infinitum, that are affected by fatigue, don't really realize how their performance is being undermined by the fatigue factor. And that was the gist of this book, Dead Tired. I wanted to delve into that subject a little more and discuss the hows and whys and wherefores and what one can do to combat it and what one can do to prevent it. And I also wanted to do a little expose of why the pilot fatigue problem endured over the many years. And of course, that why is directly related to aviation lobbyists and special interest groups who want to make sure that the company gets maximum utilization of their pilots by allowing them to fly 16-hour duty days. And even at this time right now, although there have been some significant changes made by the FAA, at this time right now, a pilot can go to work and fly 16 hours, then have 8 hours off, and during that 8-hour window, that pilot person has to get to his hotel or his home, get some sleep, get something to eat, get some sleep, and then 8 hours later, he can be ready to go again, which might get him 5 hours of sleep. Well, that's what's been happening in this country for a long time with domestic aviation. And this was kind of one of those subjects that was on the back burner. It was sort of like the the crazy great aunt that we keep up in the attic because we don't want to deal with her. So it was not very much in the forefront until on February 9th, 2009, there was a horrific airplane crash in Buffalo, New York. And most people remember that well because it was the last, interesting enough, 4 years ago from right about now, it was the last domestic fatal accident in this country. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit more as we go. But at any rate, in that particular airplane, it was Flight Continental 3407, operated by a subcontractor, i.e. a regional carrier / commuter, as they're called. It was operated by Colgan Air, and Colgan Air operated on a shoestring with experienced, overworked pilots. And the two pilots that were in the cockpit of the airplane that crashed in Buffalo were extremely tired. Neither one of them had been in a bed in over 30 hours. The fatigue factor had them to the point where they were just hanging on with their fingernails for consciousness. And then some bad things happened in the cockpit. They had some icing conditions they were dealing with, and long story short, the pilot, captain flying the airplane, made a severe aviator faux pas and flew the airplane into a stall and kept it into a stall until the airplane went out of control and crashed. And at any rate, his poor decision and poor handling of the situation was almost certainly created by his tiredness, his state of sleep deprivation. In aviation accidents are usually caused by a chain of events, and the chain breaks down and deteriorates, and the last event, the last bad thing that occurred, for instance, we might have a bad weather day, and then we're running low on fuel, and then we have a mechanical malfunction, and these three items could have the plane on the edge of safety, if you will, and that one other item, such as tiredness, breaks the chain and the airplane crashes. And all too frequently, the precursor, a primary precursor in an airplane accident is a tired pilot in the cockpit. And this is true, well, this is true in commercial aviation. It's also true in what we call general aviation, the people flying their Cessna 172s around. Sometimes, as a matter of fact, we frequently have people come up from the islands that have flown their little airplane up from the islands, and they stop and do a fuel stop in customs here in West Palm or Fort Lauderdale, and then they're going up into the Midwest or the Northeast to continue home. And by the time they get back to their home, wherever it might be 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. They've probably been up since 6 o'clock in the morning, and they crash the airplane on approach just because, quite often because they're tired. But at any rate, the rest of the book discusses a lot of the physiological anomalies of fatigue and what happens. Again, the whys and wherefores. But it also points out that the fatigue problem is not strictly a pilot problem. It's a driver problem. It can be any professional group of people that work long duty hours, like, for instance, of course, the folks who work in hospitals. Those people that work in the emergency room work 14, 16, or even 24-hour shifts. And at any rate, it's really a ongoing problem in many different realms of professional life. And the NTSB, by the way, has
That would be the National
thank you, Charlene. National Transportation Safety Board, who does all the accident investigations. A couple items. First of all, they've determined that approximately 20% of auto accidents and truck accidents are caused by the driver falling asleep. That's a pretty amazing statistic when you think about it. It's not readily quantifiable, but that's their estimate. And then the NTSB also, interestingly enough, did some research almost 20 years ago and came up with a conclusion that it would be wise for the pilots to take cat naps en route if they have a long flight, 3, 4, 5-hour flight, particularly if it's on the backside of the circadian rhythm cycle between midnight and 5 a.m. or whatever. It would be highly advantageous, safety enhancing, to have pilots intermittently take naps. One pilot naps for a while, the other, he wakes up, gets sharp, the other pilot naps for a while. And interesting enough, the FAA rejected that because the FAA said, this is true, Charlene, the FAA said, we don't think it would look good. They were concerned about the image, the thought of passengers knowing that their pilots might take a nap in the cockpit. So the FAA did this PR thing and rejected it. And now the reality of it is on most of those red-eye flights that hopefully nobody ever has to do because they wreck you for about 2 days. The red-eye flight leaves the West Coast at 10 or 11 o'clock at night and spends 5 or 6 or 7 hours in the air and gets you someplace here on the East Coast early in the morning. But on those flights, I will be nearly certain, unquantifiable of course, but nearly certain that one or both of those pilots at various times are catching a cat nap. By the same token, if you jump on the airplane and head for Europe, as most of the European flights leave the East Coast at the evening hours, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, to go fly for 7, 8, 9 hours, those pilots also are catnapping in the airplane. And interesting enough, the other air carriers around the world have listened to the NTSB recommendations, and they've implemented a procedure where their pilots will do just what I described earlier, take their prescribed cat nap. One guy takes one after 2 hours, he wakes up, and vice versa. But at any rate, the pilot fatigue problem has been it has been there for nearly 50 years, and it finally got addressed after the crash in Buffalo, because something very interesting happened in that crash. There were several victims in that crash that had some people in Buffalo that had some contacts with government big dogs, if you will, some congressmen and senators, and they initiated as a result of the crash, they shortly found out that there was a serious fatigue problem with the pilots, so they initiated a
investigation.
Yes, the investigation. There we go. That's the one. And now I'll get all of it. It's a Congressional Subcommittee Investigation for Aviation Safety. All of that. And interestingly enough, Sully Sullenberger was there, and they asked Sully what we ought to do about aviation safety, and he said, if you want a safer airline environment in this country, we got to start paying the pilots more, because the low salaries that are paid to the commuter pilots lead to situations that result in pilot fatigue. And in this situation with the Buffalo crash, both of those pilots commuted to work from the West Coast of the United States, and they were up all night getting to work, as opposed to having a apartment or paying for a hotel there in Newark, where they were based, where they started the flight. They didn't have that. So they caught a little cat nap, and instead of going to a hotel and paying $150 for a hotel, they caught a cat nap in the lounge, in the pilot lounge.
Yeah.
But it didn't provide them the rest they needed. But that's kind of an overview of the aviation pilot fatigue problem that is, by the way, is being finally resolved. The FAA was mandated by Congress to implement some meaningful changes that would enhance aviation safety through reduced flight and duty times for the pilots, and they did a great job of it. It took a long time. It took them 3.5 years to gather all their data, but they did a wonderful job. They did a lot of sleep research information and combined it all into a really nice program that will now take the 16 hours I mentioned earlier to 13 hours. And what it'll do even more so is during those periods of what we call the backside of the clock, when our circadian rhythm is at its lowest, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning, if you start a duty period during that time, then you're restricted to only 9 hours, for instance, of duty time. So they've taken a lot of, made a lot of very, very positive changes, and then they've also implemented a program where all the airlines will have to have a training program. They call it a fatigue risk management program, where all of the management people and the pilots and schedulers and operational people will have to engage in a training program that will make everyone more knowledgeable and aware of the problem. But at any rate,
So that caused you to write a book.
absolutely right. I wrote the book, and now the book is being disseminated in many different places, but where I'm trying to get it to mostly, of course, is into the pilots' hands, so the pilots can review the information in here, where I do discuss symptoms, and not only do I discuss the symptoms of fatigue, but I also discuss the countermeasures, what we can do to work against the fatigue. Like, for instance, how about a cup of coffee? For instance, a good old cup of Joe will really, really, as we all know, I mean, that's not rocket science, that's common sense. Or these energy drinks, Red Bull will get you going, give you a little bit of energy. The only problem is these caffeine drinks that get you up for a little bit, they drop you.
Bring you down.
They drop
Bring you
you,
down
drop
a
you
little
like a
bit,
brick
yeah.
later. And there's other things it can do. Like I mentioned in the book that perhaps something people could do is the two pilots could get in a political discussion, and both of them take opposite perspectives. That would that would get them going pretty good.
Now,
And things of
did
that
you
nature.
have
Go
an
ahead, Sharon.
thing you wanted to read?
Yeah, got a little excerpt in here that I want to relate to y'all. And
Because, we drive fatigue too, drive a car, sort of.
yeah, and the tired driver is going to be discussed right here on page 78. This book came within 2 seconds at the most from never making it to the publisher. Just prior to completion of the manuscript, the author was returning from an air show book event. After a 4 a.m. get-up and a very demanding workday, I fell asleep at the wheel. It was approximately 4:30 p.m., that circadian rhythm downtime on a 2-lane highway. I felt the symptoms of severe fatigue, and despite a few earlier head bobs, I decided I could guts it out, denial, and pressed on. The terror that I experienced upon awakening in the opposite direction, nose to nose, with a large semi staring me in the face, was unprecedented even during my 36-year aviation career. It was one of those situations where once I got in my lane and the truck went by, I said, oh my God, I came that close to splattering on the grill on this semi, and I said, you know, I was lucky. I survived my head bob and got my consciousness back to the point where I could get back in my own lane, but an awful lot of people have not. An awful lot of people have not. And again, be careful out there driving when you're tired.
Yeah.
But,
So you wrote the book, and both books.
yes. The
Uh,
Rogue Aviator, by the way, excuse me, Sharp, but the Rogue Aviator also, the Rogue Aviator kind of led to Dead Tired because I have several discussions and anecdotes relating to my 36-year career where I fell asleep in the cockpit quite often out of total necessity, and I also relate when I had 20 and 24-hour duty days from the time I got to the airplane till the time I get out was 24, 25 hours. And in many cases, because of the nature of international flying regulations, it was actually illegal. But very important, with the new regulations, they now have stated that if the pilot or any of the pilots feel that they are too tired to fly, is all they have to do is call the office and speak to the dispatcher, chief pilot, or whoever's in charge and say, sorry, I'm too tired, going to the hotel. And I actually did this several times during my career. But it took a lot of courage to do that because in many situations, if you don't have union protection and or the rules that are going to be implemented, as I just referred to, they said, well, if you're not going to fly the trip, then stop by the office and pick up your final check tomorrow. You're fired.
Right.
Yeah. So at any rate, that leads to a lot of pilots flying tired because they don't have that union protection.
Well, it's odd you say that. Not odd, but the trucking industry, you cannot drive. You see the checkpoints coming constantly. They have their logbooks right with them, and they stop them constantly to see if they're, have been.
Yep. In most cases, I think they're restricted to 11 hours. They can't go over 11 hours.
Oh, I thought it was 8, actually.
Maybe it is.
But,
It may be in some
if you drive
circumstances.
8, you rest 8, or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I should research that too. Thanks.
But your books are for sale.
Oh, yes, they're for sale. First of all, you can get them online by going to my website, which is 3 W's, of course, therogueaviator.com, or you can go to deadtiredpilots.com. But the easiest way is to go to therogueaviator.com, and then there's a link there that takes you to the Dead Tired for this book, the website for this book, which describes the book and allows you to order it. It also, when you get to the website, you will see at the top of the website blog. And if you click on blog, it'll take you to the blog. I write a blog about once a week. The last blog I wrote was relating to the 787 Dreamliner. And those of you I know have been following the news. And at any rate, the title of this recent blog is called the 787 Dreamliner or Nightmare Air Machine. And at any rate, the previous blog was related to the Learjet crash that occurred in Mexico about a month ago, if anyone of you remember that, with the famous singer, not famous, but she's quite popular, modern singer, Jenny Rivera. I don't know if anybody caught that or not. But that airplane took off at 3:15 in the morning. 03:15, or as we called it, dark 30, that airplane departed with a captain that was 78 years old and a rookie green co-pilot. So the bottom line there is I'd be about 90% sure that that airplane crashed in the mountains south of Monterey, where they left as a result of pilot fatigue leading to a pilot error problem. But anyway, back to answer your question, Charlene. Forgive me, I digress frequently, as you well know. But at any rate, the books can also be purchased right across the street at the good old Gulfstream Pharmacy.
It's right next door.
Right next door, not across the street. Yeah, there you go. I'm disoriented. I got vertigo.
Right
there,
outside.
Sharon. I'm tired. I got up too early this morning.
There we go. So should we be afraid to fly? That's what I want to know.
I'm glad you asked me that question, Sharon. That's a good one. No, and what I want to mention to you is that you probably caught it earlier, but the last fatal domestic accident in this country by a U.S. air carrier was 4 years ago. That's 4 years with
Knock on
tens of
wood.
thousands of flights every day, and there hasn't been another fatal aircraft crash. So our aviation safety in this country is still absolutely phenomenal, but there is an ongoing weak link, and there always will be to a degree, with the tired pilots in the cockpit. But what the FAA did with their new rules is going to help. It's going to help alleviate that to a degree. But you still have a situation where if you climb in that chartered airplane, if you climb into a chartered airplane, you don't know now if those pilots have had any sleep, because they're not operating under the same parameters and rules that the airline pilots are.
Is a commercial.
As a commercial pilot.
Right, okay.
And by the way, back to where you might buy the books, either one. The Rogue Aviator is a fun read. This is pretty serious. This is more of an academic discussion of the pilot fatigue problem we've been talking about. But you can buy them at Amazon. They're for sale at Amazon, and also for sale as an ebook at Amazon. But at any rate, it's been fun today, and I thank BBC Channel 8 and all the fine folks at Briny Breezes for letting me come down again and talk to you. And thanks again, Shar, for keeping me awake here during the interview.
I never said a word, hardly, Al. But we know that happens when we're with Al. So
She's used to that.
So